The scene was chaotic, a stark contrast to the serene blue sky that loomed over Waco, Texas on that fateful day on May 17, 2015. What began as a regular afternoon turned into a nightmare, unraveling the fabric of peace that usually blanketed the Twin Peaks restaurant. Laughter and idle chatter morphed into cries of terror as rival biker gangs clashed in a violent confrontation that would leave an indelible mark on the town's history. When the smoke cleared, 9 men were dead, 20 people were injured, and 177 bikers were arrested for engaging in organized criminal activity, resulting in murder and aggravated assault, including the Grim Guardians Motorcycle Club. 155 bikers were subsequently indicted for the offense of engaging in organized criminal activity on $1 to $2 million bond each by the then McClellan County District Attorney Abel Reyna. 10 years later, Texas prosecutors couldn't convict a single person. Only one of these 155 indicted bikers was ever brought to trial, and he was acquitted. The current McClellan County District Attorney Barry Johnson eventually dropped all charges in the 2015 shootout. 4 members of the Grim Guardians Motorcycle Club showed up to Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas on May 17, 2015 for a meeting about state politics. Instead, rival motorcycle gangs opened fire on each other before police moved in. They walked into gunfire and they left in handcuffs. In this new insider exclusive Justice in America special, our investigative news team sits down with Brent Kuhn, who represents these 4 members: Jim Albert Harris, Bonner Crump Jr., Drew King, and Juan Carlos Garcia, who are suing the city, law enforcement, and the restaurant for violating their civil rights, slandering their reputations, and more. Brent has described this police action as the worst police operation initiated by law enforcement in the history of Texas, including the fiasco of the Branch Davidian storming that killed dozens of innocent women and children outside of Waco over 20 years ago. They're not the first bikers to sue over the shootout, but they are the first to demand $1 billion and compare the violence to poison gas attacks in Syria. Harris, Crump, King, and Garcia say they were only arrested because of their presence at Twin Peaks and because they were wearing biker colors. But they say they committed no crimes that day, yet their bonds were set at $2 million, while the rest of the bikers had bail set at $1 million. According to their suit, the men were unsuspectingly going to a place they weren't wanted or liked, and where a paranoid and trigger-happy faction of local law enforcement had already been preparing for a shootout. What followed was a prosecutorial fiasco, as one by one, the criminal cases collapsed under a former district attorney's leadership, which led to an FBI probe of Abel Reyna. The only person to go to trial was Christopher Jake Carrizal, president of the Dallas Bandidos chapter. The county spent a total of $1.3 million preparing for his trial and investigating all the Twin Peaks case. Carrizal was accused by prosecutors of organizing the brawl, but the jury saw it otherwise. In November 2017, the jury in Carrizal's case voted 10-2 for acquittal, causing the mistrial. Over 130 of the bikers have filed civil rights lawsuits against the police and DA's office, angry they had been labeled gang members while insisting they were innocent of any gang conspiracy. Will anyone ever be held accountable for the deaths of 9 people during the biker club shootout in the middle of a Twin Peaks restaurant parking lot in broad daylight in 2015? Because this case is not only about the deaths and injuries inflicted on these victims, but also the Texas law's profiling of all motorcycle groups as gangs, a blatant violation of these clients' civil rights, and an unprecedented abuse of police and law enforcement power. Now Brent's clients want and deserve answers and justice, as well as compensation for the extreme and unwarranted financial and emotional hardships they were forced to endure by the former district attorney's incompetent, unethical, and rogue prosecutorial local politics. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Houston, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce Brent Kuhn to the show. Welcome to the show, Brent.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So this is a rather interesting case. 9 people were killed in Waco, Texas. Motorcycle club members. Some people refer to them as gang members. And you are representing 4 members of the Grim Guardian Motorcycle Club, correct? And I want to have that distinction between what is the difference between a club and a gang. Would you please elaborate there?
I think the whole concept of the motorcycling community is whitewashed to some degree by the media, but really more driven by certain elements of law enforcement in trying to categorize any group of guys that are wearing cuts, what you call, you see the guys colored, they're wearing jackets, they all have an affiliated name to them.
In other words, that gets into another thing that I want to talk about, profiling, right? Guy wears a vest, leather vest. He's got, you know, so-and-so motorcycle club, whatever. I don't think any of these vests say gang on there.
No, they do not.
And all of a sudden, law enforcement has to watch them or stop them or whatever because they're probably dealing with narcotics, right? They're probably committed some crime down the street, right? And tell us what happened in Waco, Texas.
Well, you know, that stereotyping of all motorcycle clubs are innately evil and bad criminal elements. You know, first of all, that stereotype's fundamentally wrong. It was propagated by some of the old black and white movies back in the 50s, and you know, Marlon Brando and some of those movies where the biker element was all trouble. The reality is that most clubs, I'm national counsel to the vast majority of the clubs that are what they call OMC clubs, ones that are dedicated to the biking community. But most of those clubs, yeah, you have your Hells Angels groups and stuff out there that have some reputation for being tough guys. But for every one of those, you have 10 that are clubs that are no drinking clubs, AA type clubs. You have Christian clubs. You have other kinds of what you would call do-gooder.
But they all have in common, they like riding motorcycles.
They love riding motorcycles. It's a culture of the motorcycle community. It's a brotherhood within each of them that they love to ride. Most of them have it's like a grown man's Boy Scout program. They got their own clubhouse. They all get to go meet over there and hang out. It's a fraternity of primarily males that, interestingly, particularly with your military background, stem from military involvement. Most of these guys historically were in the military. And when they were conscripted by our government to go to war in World War II and in the Vietnam stuff, when they came back, the thing that they needed for an identity to get back into the community and get back over here and be productive again, they needed that sense of their brotherhood, their platoon. Where's my platoon? The only guys that had my back for the 4 years I was in the military and in combat, I need that support group again. And they matriculated to the bike clubs. So you have the public loving our military and appreciating all the sacrifices they made, and yet sometimes despising those same guys just because they're wearing a jacket that identifies them as a motorcyclist. And that's a hypocrisy of it, but law enforcement has driven that home and created a lot more of that false narrative.
Well, let's talk about that, because in your state, Governor Abbott, I believe, somehow got legislation passed that denigrates motorcycle clubs, right? Basically classifies them as gangs.
Texas created a gang database, and they get to put on there who they think is a gang member. Now, a gang has a negative connotation. It doesn't have to be. Historically, you have labor gangs. You work out at a plant. You're in a refinery. You're not an operator yet. You haven't earned. Well, I'm working in a labor gang. So gang itself never historically, by the word, had a negative connotation. But when you associate it to bikers and say it's a biker gang, well, a gang just means a group of. But when they say, and law enforcement in particular says biker gang, it creates that connotation. And what they mean is that the gang, by just calling them a gang instead of a club, has that negative connotation. And that's where it's wrong. But as a result of that, Abbott and our governor and the legislature has a gang database. And the people they put in there are not just people that are club affiliated with each other. They put in there people they think are bad actors. And unfortunately, for everybody that's a citizen in Texas, you don't know who's on that list, and you don't know why they put you on the list. And there's nothing you can do to get off the list. They get to arbitrarily decide. You don't have to be a criminal. You don't have to be arrested for anything. You don't have to be a convicted felon. You don't have to be identified as a drug dealer or anything else. They can just put you in there. They being anybody that's networked into the gang database, they can put you in there, and then you're in there and forever. And then if you get pulled over, you're driving your motorcycle, even if you're just riding in your car down the road, you get pulled over and they run your background. It's like, oh, you're a gang member. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, you're in our gang database. And it's like, well, who put me there? I hadn't done anything wrong. It's like, well, somebody decided. Well, like who? Well, we don't know, but somebody did. And it's, it just shocks you how unconstitutional that sounds.
Yeah, what happens as a result of being pulled over and showing up in a gang database?
Yeah, well, if you're in a gang database and you got a gun, you're already violating the law.
Even if you have no convictions. There's an open carry state. You can carry a weapon. You're in a gang database, and what are you going to be arrested for?
For carrying a gun.
But you haven't done anything wrong. You don't have a record.
That's the point. You can buy a gun in a 7-Eleven in Texas, and yet you can end up on the mystery gang database that you're never even told. It's not like, dear Mr. Jones, we put you on the gang database. If you think that this has been done in error, you're not really some kind of gangster.
They'll sell you a gun, even if you're in the database.
Sure. I'm surprised with the state of things in our state that they don't give them the gun and then arrest them for having the gun.
Right. So on this date in Waco, Texas, at the Twin Peaks, a place where a lot of motorcycle guys hung out, right? They had a shootout. What actually really happened beyond the headlines?
Well, there was a shootout. The question is, who shot at whom? What we do know all right, why was this at Twin Peaks? Twin Peaks has, they're a restaurant. They sell hamburgers, stuff like that. They're a national chain. But one of the things that makes them inviting for the motorcycle groups is that they have a very large outdoor area. And a lot of the guys with their bikes, they like to park them outside. They like to be close enough to them so nobody's messing with them. You can't lock it up like you can your car. So they like to keep an eye on them. Also, a lot of them have custom paint, all kinds of other stuff. People see them, they like to climb on them and get their picture on them and stuff. It's like the level of violations that happens if you have a motorcycle and people like doing stupid stuff with them is a lot different than if you got your car and everything's locked up. So they like to keep an eye on them. And in doing that, they like to park outside, sit outside, smoke cigarettes, drink beer. And so these kinds of places are very conducive to the atmosphere they like. It also holds a lot of people, so you can have little group gatherings. Motorcycle clubs love to have group gatherings, and so they go on rides. So they'll go to the clubhouse and say, hey, this weekend we're all going for a ride wherever. And they all get in their bikes and they all go for the ride. And these kinds of places like Twin Peaks is a common watering hole. And in fact, most of these places like Hooters, Twin Peaks, and many other restaurants have what they call bike night. And they actually provide additional entertainment, and they have a marketing inducement to bring the bikers out there. Twin Peaks and most of their franchises have such a bike night. We love bikers. We don't see them as evil elements, criminal elements. We know that the vast majority of them aren't. In fact, statistically, percentage-wise, the chance of you being a convicted felon statistically is less in a biker club than the general population. Yes. So that's the hypocrisy of all of it, how all this is spun from the stereotyping. So against that background, the meeting of all the bike clubs is called, as a result of the parent organization in Texas called the Texas Confederation of Clubs and Independents. And that organization is designed almost exclusively to address legislative issues. It's a lobbying wing for the biking community to go to Austin when the legislature convenes every 2 years and say, here's issues we have that we want addressed, or we don't want the law changed because we like that law there, or we want the law changed because something's wrong over here. So it may be addressing, do we have to wear helmets? Do we have to do this, or do we have to do that? A lot of people don't see motorcycles on the road, so can we work with the legislature to have heightened awareness of motorcycles, more signage associated to keep an eye out for those kinds of things. And then there's also always near and dear to them, we would like some laws passed that say, don't pull us over and hassle us just because we're on a motorcycle, and in particular, if we have jackets identifying ourselves with a club. That's illegal profiling. So don't pull us over. It's no different than the profiling you've heard from the minority community throughout our country. It is just a cop's decision to pull you over because he or she doesn't like you, either because of your color, because of what you're driving, or in this case, what you're riding. You're on a motorcycle, I don't like you. So I'm going to pull you over and I'm going to interrogate you and hassle you just because you're on a bike. Not that you did anything wrong, not that you got any criminal history. I don't want you around. I don't like you. And so I'm going to pull you over to hassle you. And that's what they do.
So what happened here was two motorcycle groups ended up at the same club, right? Somewhere within these organizations, there was a rat, if you will, a plant for the cops who were well aware that they were going to be meeting there. And rather than having a public presence to ensure that, safety was done and everything, they were hiding out, weren't they?
They were hiding out. What we do know in this case, and again, they've fought for a decade, us being able to get a lot of the depositions and other discovery we need. I'll go into that in a little bit. But long story short, there was a statewide meeting of all the bike clubs at the Twin Peaks so that people that were going to the legislature and knowing what was going on in the halls, talking to the legislators, what bills were coming up, they would be able to brief them all. Like, guys, here's where the legislature at on this and that, in this region over here, this is what this legislature is saying. It would be helpful if you call him or her and let them know personally how important this is to you, because that helps stimulate attention to it and may drive their decision on the vote. So they try to get their groups organized. So when you representatives for your clubs go back to your hometown, take this message back and get your folks working at the local level with your local legislator to make sure that things go the way we want if we can.
Kind of like a convention.
It's a convention. These are ad hoc conventions. Now, what we know is that there's always some element out there with a club that has some agenda. And in this case, there was a club up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area called the Cossacks. They had a long-running feud with another club called the Bandidos. And as a result of that, they were not part of the statewide council. They had been ostracized for their troublemaking ways, and they were not invited. We know that they, being the Cossacks, made a decision to come down to Waco and go to that Twin Peaks on the date of that meeting as an uninvited guest. In fact, as a guest that is they know not to go there. So they go there to flaunt the fact that you can't keep us out of here. It's a public restaurant. So they went over there to annoy them and potentially to deliberately look for trouble. And we now know from the trials and the criminal proceedings that the Cossacks had somebody working with law enforcement that told law enforcement, this is what that club's doing. They're going to go down to Waco where a state convention meeting is occurring on legislative issues, and they're going to try to cause trouble. So now we know law enforcement knows about it. So what did they do about it? Did they go to all the bike clubs and say, hey, you got this renegade club that's been causing you all these problems and y'all been feuding. Just want y'all to know that. So let's take some extra precautions. How about law enforcement bring a bunch of cars out there to the parking lot that day? How about maybe you don't have it this day? And that's just diffuse the situation. But if we can't diffuse it and you're going to have it anyway, let's just make sure we got cops around, we got the lights, make sure it's protected. We may even say no guns on the premises because they serve alcohol. There's things they could do to restrict weaponry if they chose, but there's things you can do to make sure nothing got out of hand. The cops didn't do that. And this is not just cops. This is like Texas Rangers, Sheriff's Office, Waco Police Department, some federal elements. All of these people are all meeting, discussing, what do we do about it? Well, if it gets out of hand, maybe we just start shooting them all. And that sounds insane, but what they did is they went out in the bushes around the parking lot out here, knowing all are convenient out in the open, and they've got snipers. Snipers, you were in the military? Snipers ain't good but for one thing, to kill people. They're not out there target practicing with beer cans. Hey, watch me, I'm going to shoot this beer can out of this guy's hand. Well, I'm going to shoot the hat off the other guy. They're there to shoot and kill people. That is the only reason you bring snipers to hide in bushes, to kill the enemy. The problem was here, they had already made a decision that all the bikers there could all be considered the enemy. And this isn't a war. These are your other American citizens, most of them there to talk about legislative issues. And they did nothing to diffuse it. Instead, they hid. And then things did get provoked, in no small part because law enforcement encouraged it at some level. And then when it did, and somebody pulled out a gun, then all hell broke loose. And all the video shows the vast majority of people there were scared to death. And these are still tough bikers, but once bullets come out, they're all vulnerable. And the vast majority of them, they didn't pull out guns and start shooting each other like OK Corral. Most of them started running for any kind of cover they could find. And there were a few people that stood their ground and duked it out shot it out or whatever. But the vast majority of people did what anybody else would do, which is try to run and hide and keep from getting hurt. And in the middle of all that, law enforcement started unloading on people that were down in there and killing them.
Have they identified, there were 9 people killed.
Yes.
Have they identified, I think there were 4 of them they identified that came from law enforcement weapons, correct?
It was determined, and I don't think that anything's conclusively proven, but it was generally determined that about half of them were shot with the type of bullets, and I think mostly 223s that were the ones that were coming from the sniper type equipment.
Nobody's ever been held responsible for that, have they?
There's not been a single person that has been fully held accountable at any level of the law.
Nor identified, correct?
There's been some identification of some of the people that were involved in
The
it.
cops.
The cops, there's some level of understanding of who the people were that were engaged in different roles there, but there's been no finding a wrongdoing on any other part. But for the most part, there hasn't been an ability to even get there yet, because even our efforts to have civil liability hasn't gotten off of second base.
Now, your clients, 4 of them, who are members of the
Grim Guardians.
They showed up like after everybody was there, right? Before the shooting started, right? But they got arrested along with 177 other people, right?
Absolutely.
My question is, almost every single one of them got charged with, what were they charged with initially?
Yeah, initially, almost everybody there was charged with either murder or conspiracy to commit murder.
Right, and they all had $1 million bail. But your clients got $2 million bails.
Well, actually, before that, they only got $50,000 because they were after the fact people. These 4 guys, and Grim Guardian sounds like such a fierce name, but it's funny to see how fierce some of these names are and how good-mannered and nice some of the club members are. The Grim Guardians guys, they all worked in Austin. Most of them worked like city engineers and other kinds of regular jobs. And it's kind of a do-gooder club. They do stuff for orphans and other kids, and the CASA programs and stuff like that. One of them actually went down to Mexico every year. I don't know if you remember the movie with Robin Williams called Patch Adams, where they helped all these orphan kids and sick kids. He would volunteer his services, go down to Mexico every year to help with that. So this is that fierce group that they're arresting.
Why were their bails doubled to $2 million?
Because of the ignorance and incompetence of the local law enforcement. What basically happened was, after these first rounds of arrests were made that did at least capture these guys, these 4 guys just pulled up into the parking lot next to the Twin Peaks. They hadn't even gotten off the bikes to get over where all this was going. In fact, there were other people that weren't even there for club activities. Some people just rode in on their motorcycle riding around the state and said, well, let's just go to the Twin Peaks and get lunch. They got sucked into it and all got arrested and charged as well.
How long were they in jail?
Some of them were there for a month or longer. Yeah, they post bail. Bails eventually were reduced on some of them based on other conditions. Took a long time for a lot of that to work out. But for these 4 guys, they got in, they got out the same or near the same time on very low bails. Later, days passed as the dust settled, it was felt that these 4 guys got off light.
They got rearrested.
And so we got to go get them back. They had no reason to go get them back, but somebody decided we need to go get these back. Somehow they slipped out. Let's go get them. Well, what do we do? Let's double the amount for their deal, make them sound like they're the worst of the actors. And let's go to Austin and go to their jobs and arrest them. Can you imagine, after the ordeal that you just went through, where you narrowly avoided getting shot in the crossfire of the cops and all this chaos going on, and you still got hauled to jail and accused of at least some wrongdoing, and you finally get back home, it's like, I can't believe I just went through that. And at least now back at work, maybe things will normalize, at least for me. All these other bike club guys, I don't know what's going to happen to them, but at least I'm not. And then just have SWAT teams of people come rolling into your office where you're working and grab you like you're Charlie Manson and haul you back in and throw you back in jail with a $2 million murder charge. Well, what the hell is going on here?
Where is the case now?
The case is still in legal purgatory or legal hell. We are 10 years into this case in 2 months. And in that 10 years, we had a federal judge and the lawsuits brought by all these motorcyclists saying this was a railroaded, fictitious BS roundup. Vast majority of us didn't do anything other than try to run and hide. None of us here knew about any of this was going to happen. The cops didn't tell us anything was going to happen. And yet I still got put in jail on a probable cause affidavit signed by a police officer with the Waco PD who has filled out this form and swore that all these facts are true. And all these facts include my activities, my illegal activities, my involvement in the shootings, all these things I allegedly did. And not coincidentally, every one of those probable cause affidavits reads identical. And the reason they do is because the cops and the people that were working with them to rubber stamp this charge process all just made up those facts and made them the same for every one of them. And that is just about as gross of unconstitutional deprivation of rights as you could have. And they didn't do it one time. They did it almost 200 times for every one of these guys.
Right. So you have filed suit on behalf of your clients.
We did.
4 of your grim guardians, and you have filed suit for $1 billion, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you have likened it akin to the victims of the Syrian gas crisis, right?
Yes. There's nothing you can compare to that is such an egregious violation of constitutional rights, purposefully designed to malign somebody just because they own a motorcycle. You have so many people with a hateful ideology in multiple different levels of law enforcement in Waco. This wasn't just from one bad cop. This was from multiple bad cops. This was from a whole department that coincidentally has a ban on motorcycle cops in their own police department.
They do.
You can't ride a motorcycle. There's no motorcycle cops there. You know, ever since Marlon Brando was on his Harley back in the 1950s with what was called the Bad Guy or whatever the name of that movie, they banned it. This is a town that's notorious for a long checkered history with their racial profiling, racial bias, and other types of bias. It's a notorious history. And all the history they had with all their racial problems and the public lynchings and everything that took place there, that same type of attitude still permeates a lot of the community there, and particularly with law enforcement. And they went and rounded all these guys up. They knew they were lying when they filed all these charges. Then the spokesperson, the police chiefs, all these other people went on national TV over and over again and said, we just rounded up 200 bad biker gang guys that were in a big territorial fight here. And fortunately, we came in and saved the town. And that was so much hype bullshit, it would make you throw up if you really knew any of the facts. Unfortunately, there was nobody to speak for the other side because all 200 of them were sent to jail.
Now, talk to us a little bit about Judge Susan Chris. What part does she play in this case?
She played a very important part early on in attaching a level of judicial credibility to the things that the plaintiffs were complaining of here. I knew Judge Chris. I was lead counsel in the BP refinery explosion. Killed a lot of people, innocent people. It was a highly avoidable incident. In fact, it's so highly avoidable that we were able to take the case to the Department of Justice and get BP criminally charged and convicted of 15 counts of manslaughter, which never happens in a refinery case, but it happened here. Judge Chris oversaw all that litigation in Galveston. It was a huge case. And for many people, many judges, that would be a particularly overwhelming case because of the magnitude, the media attention. The pressure involved. You have one of the biggest corporations in the world there with thousands of lawyers beating on the court system and me and others as lead counsel. And she held the helm there incredibly admirably and steered that ship all the way to the finish line, where after I tried a bunch of cases, every one of them was able to get resolved before a final jury verdict, and the vast majority were able to avoid even having to go to trial. But it took years of hard work and her focus and attention almost daily. The good thing about that background and experience and tenacity was that she had also been a prosecutor for Galveston for a long time before, so she knew how the system worked. And since then, she's done, since retiring from the bench, she's done criminal defense work. She's seen all sides of all this, and she was more than happy to weigh in on the one-year anniversary of this incident by being a public spokesperson at a panel press conference we had over what had happened after year one. It was a very impressive and important press conference because what had happened after year one of this horrible incident is that it polarized the entire biking community countrywide and got them to act together as one organization to deal with the problem of profiling, and that in the worst case circumstances with profiling, it wasn't that you're going to be pulled over and harassed by a renegade cop. It was that you were going to be shot by one and then blamed for it.
When do you foresee the ability to start taking depositions and get this thing moving?
You know, we've been on appeal several times to the Fifth Circuit. We're in the federal courts here, so everything has to go to New Orleans. And we've dealt with these immunity issues in front of that court several times. The good news is the Fifth Circuit has, we think now, made pretty clear where the exposure is on these immunity issues in this particular case, on these particular facts. So we're just right around the corner from being able to take the substantive depositions. We lost 4 or 5 years having to sit and wait until the criminal cases went through the process. Our judge didn't want anything going on in the civil cases until the criminal cases were resolved. To show you how fictitious the charges were that were made, the state went and pulled their best case out of all 200 charges, the one they thought they could win, most likely win, their best foot forward. They took that case and they couldn't even win it. And as a result of that, the DA finally got fired. He actually ran on a re-election campaign of, I'm the DA who got all the bikers out of this town. I cleaned up the town. It was straight out of the 1800s. It was a Wild West deal. He's like he's Doc Holliday or something. I cleaned up the town. Hey, thank you, Gunsmoke. You know, but that's what he ran on. And it was an affront. And the city was exposed to all these liabilities. My clients aren't really expecting any kind of major result in this. They know that these legal impediments make it difficult to win anything. But there should be $1 billion result in this if it's going to result in the change that's necessary. It ain't never going to happen in a case like this. You couldn't get that kind of number under the law that we're dealing with if you wanted to, but it got their attention. And part of that risk and exposure were the things that made people pay attention to it, because it's like, oh, we're getting sued. How's that going to impact our taxes and stuff like that? What happened? Because otherwise we wouldn't even look at it. Now it's like, we need to look at what happened if we're really going to have to pay something. So then at least the local media said, you know what happened? These guys all got railroaded, and we saw that with the trials, and it looks like we've got a lot of legal exposure here. And then it's like, well, who made that legal exposure and why they do it? Well, because you got a bunch of renegade cops here that were all on national TV saying one thing when the truth is, that's now come out in the criminal trial, the truth is that's not what happened. And so they need to be fired or voted out of office. So if nothing else good's come of it, is that they didn't clean up their town and get rid of the bikers. The bikers went in there and cleaned up their town and got rid of crooked law enforcement.
We're going to be following this real carefully. Keep us updated.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for being on the show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.